reputational benefit of the Gulf state. The Emiratis have long faced criticism for their foreign policy, internal human rights record, and sports provided an opportunity to change that conversation. The claim against City was that they embellished sponsorship receipts from the Abu Dhabi-based companies to disguise what was actually equity funding, a clear contravention of Article 56 of the UEFA's club licensing and financial fair play, the FFP regulations. Of course, in theory, this isn't a big no in the UEFA's handbook, but that handbook has proved to be more of a pamphlet than UEFA's rules have been found to be achingly inadequate. Now, the Court of Arbitration for Sports, CAS, claimed they couldn't investigate City's allegations impropriety as it dates back for more than 5 years. UEFA were only prompted to investigate after German newspaper Der Spiegel published leaked emails and documents in November 2018, but it was already up to 5 years after the alleged infringement between 2012 and 2016. What took UEFA so long to investigate this breach on their own rules? So the probe, sparked after leaked documents, suggested that City owner Sheikh Mansour was mostly funding the club with 18 million annually sponsorship by the Ittihad in 2015-16 season. The team was fined and banned to join European competitions for 3 years. Nevertheless, the ban was ultimately dropped. The fine was reduced after a lengthy legal battle. Now, local news reports from the UK say that this whole matter is mostly a conspiracy, but the city owners, Manchester City's owners, have successfully radicalized their fan base to become anti-UEFA. When the FFP was introduced in 2011, it promised a new era that will protect clubs from debt and force them to live within their means, preventing reckless investments from dubious external backers, such as Russian oligarchs, American venture capitalists, and oil-rich states with questionable track records on corruption and human rights.
But of course, you use the term sports wash. It's a new term. It's an interesting term. We used to have money laundering and sort of washing money of dubious origins in UK. What I think we've got to sort of analyze this at two aspects. One is, of course, the political angle that you're talking about, and the other is, of course, purely financial. So I'll sort of try to, if you like, decipher both of the aspects in one way or another. Investors from the Middle East have long drawn to global sporting brands and assets when searching for lucrative revenue streams, which you obviously in your preamble quite rightly pointed out. France's Paris Saint-Germain football team is owned by Qatar Sports, as you said. Investments from the UAE flagship carrier Ittihad has stadiums in UK and Australia bearing its logo. And some of the biggest Premier Leagues teams are owned by billionaires from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Russia, UAE, you name it. So, you've got one aspect, as I said, European football has certainly become a huge destination for investments from Middle East in the recent years, over the last decade, if you like. Secondly, the list of teams that have received investment or brought by Middle Eastern investors is long, which includes Manchester City, as I said, Paris Saint-Germain, Aston Villa, and numerous others, perhaps not in the Premier League, but certainly in the first division and so on. But what you've got to understand is that by investing in European football, they're really tapping into the foremost market in sports. And what we economists or financial advisors talk about is return on investment. The ROI has of course been very important when considering football club investments. traditionally investment in football clubs have not been really making money. But what has happened in the recent past is that in the English league, particularly, the return on investment has been quite attractive, even if those clubs have not won any sort of championship and so on, because there's branding that goes with it. A lot of what is called product placement, like Ittihad has its sort of logo all over the football stadium, and even public broadcasters who are not supposed to be using advertising revenue to bolster their income, they still can't avoid, when the camera sort of moves from one side to another, to have those products visible. And the other thing that you've got to also remember is that 7 of the global offshore locations fly the British flag. They're former British colonies, whether it's Bermuda, Cayman Island, Jersey and Guernsey, you name it, British Virgin Island. 7 of those carry British flags still in the corner of their flag. So again, the British financial system and other businesses benefit heavily by, whether it's the rulers in the Middle East or other oligarchs from different parts of the world and dictators who are siphoning money from their poor countries or wealthy countries. They can park it in these offshore locations and bring it back into the UK, either to buy a football club. For instance, the UAE authorities, the Dubai authorities, they actually have single-handedly rescued the horse riding industry in UK. If it wasn't the investment of Dubai, then I think the horse riding industry would have completely finished a few years ago. So there are many operations that go along all the time. Other than just sort of product placement, as I was talking to you from a purely economic and financial point of view, there are other benefits that also accrue to these countries, which we may call diplomatic, political, or other aspects, which all of a sudden may benefit those nations. But I think you have to look at it also perhaps in the reverse, that is because of the British, French, and American policies, which really have, in a way, covered the crimes of the dictators, whether in the Middle East or in any other country, so long as they are willing to buy armaments from these countries and are able to continue to invest in UK, Britain, France, and USA will have nice sort of legislation, whether it's about anti-money laundering regulations, whether it's anti-bribery regulations, but really none of those regulations will ever be triggered until those chaps are no longer in power, as I said, and then the book is thrown at them. So that's the way, if you like, because of the cover that is provided by Washington, London, and Paris, that these countries are able to buy whatever they want in their respective countries in the European Union or Britain.
Well, it's the fundamental question, isn't it? If we stick to a certain set of moral ethics, we should not condone the purchase of any kind of football club, as it were, from regimes which we know are, practicing blatant human rights violation, whether it's something that is policy within their own countries or whether it's through the crime of aggression, if we take the case of Saudi Arabia, for instance. But the fact is, money talks, and the political classes of the countries which welcome those investments benefit heavily from financing from those Gulf states. I can personally speak for France, and the French policy actually very heavily favored siding with the Gulf states. There was no doubt about it. And for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, with all that flow of money flowing into French political figures' coffers, and I guess the blackmail that could then be exercised against any one of them made it that French policy on the whole was completely and one-sided. And we were to hear some outrageous statements.
By much of the Gulf has been to draw the West into this naive notion, this illusion that we are talking about communities, cultures, countries, states that are thousands of years of age, that have a rich tradition and history that has flourished, that is unique, that stems from a tribal issue of self-determination, when in reality, most of the Gulf, particularly those that have exploited their economic power and ability, are 100 years old, 150 years old, and were very much the creation or the outgrowth of British colonial control. So you have to begin with a model in which places like the UAE, like Bahrain, like Saudi, have just sort of popped up into the marketplace over the last century, and using the economic, political, and control model of the West, of colonial projects and powers, has moved along the same route. So you look at the cities, and the cities look like New York, they look like Paris, they look like the United Kingdom. You look at the politics, and they're the politics of secretive investment, manipulation, control from afar. You look at the money, it's comparable to the Panama Papers, in which you have billionaires from all over the world secreting money into offshore accounts, buying sports teams, buying communication networks, buying international and multinational corporations, and reflected their future, their investment, by stripping what little self-determination and independence and tradition they have and melding it into the European colonial projects. And that's what you have seen. You know, it's funny, as a young child, I remember the movie Lawrence of Arabia, and I never understood what it meant. And having now spent as a litigator and as an activist in the Middle East and in Africa 30 years, I understand what it meant. The role of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed colonial jeep riding through the desert, controlling, directing, cutting up, carving, and dictating, and the tension with certain tribal factions saying, okay, tell us how you want us to proceed, but meanwhile trying to out-hustle, out-manipulate, out-steal, and outplay the European colonial project. And where we have ended up with is a mirror reflection. And while folks may look differently, while folks may dress differently, while folks may speak differently, while folks may pray differently, they're very much one multinational corporation, which feeds off of age-old traditions in cities like Beirut, like Lebanon, like Libya, like Yemen, like Iraq, which feeds off of classic struggles, communities, worlds, cultures, and traditions that outdate them. They may have had their own problems with neo-colonial and European colonial interventions at times, but they present their own history, tradition, self-determination that the Gulf doesn't match. So there's very much this schism between the reality of yesterday and the attempt by the Gulf, like UAE and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, to really latch upon the European colonial projects, which themselves only crawled out of caves 400, 500 years ago. So it is this
les investissements dans le sport des pays du Golfe répondent à une autre logique. Augmenter l'influence de ces pays, par exemple, espérer un retour espérer effectivement donc que l'influence de ces pays augmente à travers les investissements. Mais en fait, ces investissements importants des pays du Golfe dans le sport européen, on sait à peu près les raisons. Essentiellement, gagner de l'influence. Il y a une course après l'influence. Mais je dirais que c'est surtout dramatique. C'est surtout dramatique parce que ces pays-là, qui ont des ressources financières, auraient dû investir tout cet argent, non pas dans le sport européen, mais dans le développement des sciences et de la recherche scientifique dans leur propre pays. Le Qatar, les Émirats arabes unis, l'Arabie saoudite ont perdu beaucoup d'argent, à mon sens, beaucoup d'argent, beaucoup de temps, beaucoup d'énergie à investir dans le sport. Or, ce n'est pas par le sport que l'on devient une grande nation, c'est par la technologie, l'innovation technologique, l'innovation scientifique, la recherche scientifique. Quand j'étais étudiant, je préparais mon doctorat en physique, j'avais écrit une lettre aux Émirats, à l'ambassade des Émirats arabes unis ou du Qatar, un pays du Golfe, ou les Émirats arabes unis ou le Qatar, je ne me souviens plus. Et j'avais écrit une lettre demandant donc à l'ambassade, j'implorais, je suppliais ces pays d'investir dans un domaine où ils seront gagnants, dans un domaine où ils auront un retour sur investissement, dans un domaine où ils pourront être à la tête des nations. Ce n'est pas par le sport, ce n'est pas par le foot. En plus, le foot étranger en Europe. Non, c'est par la science. Tous ces milliards de dollars investis, à mon sens, totalement inutilement dans le sport, ça montre une chose, ça montre la décadence de ces pays qui ne croient plus en la science. Et c'est dramatique. Ces pays ne sont plus que des pays consommateurs. Il ne faut qu'importer la technologie, mais ils ne fabriquent rien. Aujourd'hui, les défis, c'est le bouleversement climatique, les nouvelles technologies. On le voit avec le coronavirus, la fabrication de vaccins. Qui fabrique des vaccins aujourd'hui? Les États-Unis, l'Angleterre, la Chine, la Russie, mais les pays du Golfe, rien. Où se trouve aujourd'hui l'innovation? Qui reçoit les prix Nobel de physique, de chimie, de médecine? Essentiellement des Européens, des Japonais, des Américains. Mais les pays du Golfe, avec les moyens financiers qu'ils avaient, pour moi, ils ont vraiment fait un très, très, très mauvais calcul. Ce n'est pas en investissant dans le sport qu'on devient une grande nation. C'est en investissant dans la recherche scientifique, l'innovation technologique. Et ils auraient fait ça depuis 20 ou 30 ans. Aujourd'hui, peut-être dans ces pays-là, on aurait des prix Nobel de physique, de chimie, de biologie. Parce que l'avantage d'investir dans la science, c'est de breveter derrière des innovations technologiques et donc derrière de développer un tissu industriel qui donne de l'emploi à la jeunesse des pays du Golfe, à la jeunesse du monde arabe. Et